Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Ortman. I am currently studying journalism over at Olivet Nazarene University, and my presentation is going to be on women in sports broadcasting. And I wanted the article to be put in the Journalism and Mass Communication Quarterly. I found this journal while I was doing research for this assignment, but I also think that because it focuses heavily on a women element, that it could be written in some type of feminist journal as well, as it focuses heavily on women in sports broadcasting. But I wanted to make sure that it was represented by and through media rather than in a feminist realm, but I think that it could be seen in both. So I started off writing on rhetorical conventions, and throughout my paper I wanted to have a couple, so I picked similarity. I wanted the paper to be extremely cohesive and be the same throughout, so I started with APA style. I started with a topic of the past, moved down then through the same, and you can see that throughout all of my titles, that they're very similar and they have a cohesive message throughout. And I really wanted to have that as one of my conventions. I picked emphasis as well. With APA style, you're able to highlight at the beginning of each paragraph or each point what you're really wanting the reader to get out of the paragraph that they're reading. And that does help with the boldness of APA style, but also really emphasizing what each point is going to be about for the reader before diving in. And then ethos, pathos, and logos. I think that's important in any type of article. The audience is able to see emotion while also seeing logistical reasoning as well as credibility throughout my article. With that being said, the credibility can be seen through every single article that is cited, and that also then boasts credibility throughout the entire paper. Conventions that aren't found throughout my paper is contrast. I really didn't want to provide much bias in my paper, even though I'm highlighting bias. I was focusing primarily on the bias of women, and I didn't want to contrast solely for the purpose that I didn't want to get the message across to my readers that was confusing. I wanted them to stay on one solid track rather than going through the article with opposing viewpoints at every stop. I wanted them to have one cohesive idea of what I was talking about and really focus in on that. And then the other one that I really didn't want to use was repetition. With this one specifically, I wanted a cohesive idea rather than a point that was just kind of burned into the memory of my readers. I wanted it to be talked on the same line, but not using the same words, whereas it would get repetitive and my readers may lose focus as they go throughout my paper. I wanted it to be different wording and a different style rather than repeating my words. What I wanted to focus on primarily was the bias of women in sportscasting, past, present, and future. And as I started doing my research, I found that I was gaining a lot of information on the past as well as the present, but was having a really difficult time with the future. And that can be seen in my annotated bib. My annotated bib, some of the titles: The Wide World of Sports Reporting, The Influence of Gender, Expectations, Strength in Numbers, The Experience and Attitude of Women in Sports Media Careers, A Level Playing Field, Perceptions of Male and Female Sports Analysts, 20 years after Title IX, Women in Sports Media, and then passing it on, The Reinforcements of Male in Sports Journalism Textbooks. Now, all 5 of these can be seen and highlight women in sportscasting well and can be seen already through the title. However, something that I did really struggle with was finding that future element, which is why I then changed to this specific topic of past and present. I wanted to fill in that gap and not necessarily present that future if I wasn't able to provide concrete evidence. So I picked bias of women in sports broadcasting, past and present. I was able to focus heavily on what was of the past and making our way towards the present, what's going on now, but also wrapped it in my conclusion as to what we need to be looking forward to, but didn't have enough credibility to present that. Key points of the past I was able to talk a lot about Title IX, which is about sports in schools, and that also what I talk about a lot is how it primarily just focuses on the academic sector of women and men equality in sports. But I talked about that and was able to highlight women in sports media, how low the numbers were of women involved in that career. I focused on the first steps and equal equality, women breaking through. They mentioned a lot of times about a glass ceiling, women being able to break through and get to the point that they need to get to. But oftentimes they were struggling just because of a male-dominated career and the struggles that women faced to get there. Also, I wanted to put into my past point the looking towards the future. I think it's important to be able to highlight looking towards the future while also writing in the past. So what people of the 1990s found that would maybe help them get to the places they needed to get to for now. Which was nice because then I was able to move into the key points of the present. I started off with education and a bias in education. I honed in on this in one of my points on textbook specific. I mentioned this in my annotated bibliography, but bias in education was represented through textbooks, and I was able to highlight how that would even discourage women pursuing a career. I talked about a level playing field, women focusing on women's sports. That was highlighted often in my sources. Women solely focusing on women's sports allows them to maybe have more credibility because it's women playing and not men. I wrapped it up with "Are female journalists there yet?" in my article, and kind of talking a lot more about this glass ceiling that women are still seen as maybe not as credible as men, but are working their way up towards this point and are able to gather together to be able to push through that glass ceiling and create that future goal. So wrap up and final thoughts. With this paper, I was able to get a clearer sense of my career, being able to see a lot more of what that looks like for me as I'm entering into that career, see that that glass ceiling does need to be broken, see that those further steps need to be taken, and that we as women are able to control our fate and be able to push through and dominate this culture. So I hope that you enjoyed my presentation and enjoy reading through my paper. I had a lot of fun writing it and learning a lot more about it. Thanks, guys.